The forgotten tomb of Alexander. The discovery. The desert at Shiva Oasis had always carried whispers. The Bedouins told stories of strange lights on moonless nights, of phantom riders vanishing into dunes, of buried palaces built for gods and kings. For centuries, travelers had wandered these sands in search of Alexander the Great's lost tomb, but all returned with nothing but mirages and sand in their lungs. Dr. Helena Ward, however, was not a woman who chased mirages. The British archaeologist stood at the edge of a shallow excavation pit, her linen shirt damp with sweat, her boots caked with red dust. Around her, the late afternoon sun poured gold across the desert, making the air shimmer. Behind her, a row of jeeps idled under canvas tents, while a dozen local workers chipped carefully at sandstone slabs unearthed only days before. Helena ran her hand over one of the stones. Greek letters, worn but still legible, had been carved in steady strokes, Basileus Alexandros, King Alexander. Her heart had hammered when she first read it. No one had ever found a definitive tomb for the Macedonian conqueror. Ancient writers disagreed. Some claimed he was buried in Memphis, others in Alexandria. But none mentioned Shiva, yet here it was, staring at her in stone. Helena. The voice came from Yusuf, her Egyptian assistant, who scrambled up from the trench, waving a notebook filled with sketches. His beard was dusty, his turban slipping. "We've found another chamber beneath the foundation," he said breathlessly. "It's sealed with both Greek and hieroglyphic symbols. And you won't believe what it says." Helena wiped her brow and took the notebook. His drawings were crude but clear, a carved doorway, sealed with limestone blocks, bearing the Egyptian glyph for life eternal beside the Greek words clavis imperii, the key of empire. A shiver moved down her spine. "Get the others," she said. "We're opening it tonight." By the time the desert cooled and stars freckled the sky, the team gathered with lanterns and cameras before the sealed doorway. The air smelled faintly metallic, as though the sand itself had been scorched long ago. Helena placed her palm against the stone. It was warm. Too warm. "Strange," murmured Professor Varga, the Hungarian epigrapher who had joined the dig. His spectacles reflected the lamplight as he traced the hieroglyphs. "This isn't a funerary seal. It's a warning." "What does it say?" Helena asked. He hesitated. "It reads, 'He who opens this door shall march where kings fell and gods bled.'" A ripple of unease passed among the workers. Yusuf muttered a prayer under his breath. Helena straightened. "Warnings are meant to protect secrets. And secrets are meant to be uncovered." She gestured. "Break it open." The workers exchanged nervous glances, then set to work with chisels and hammers. Each strike echoed like thunder in the quiet night. Slowly, the limestone cracked. Dust billowed out, choking, and a low groan seemed to rumble from the earth itself. Finally, the last stone gave way, and a dark passage yawned before them, descending steeply into the earth. The air that wafted up was dry, but carried a faint scent of resin and something older, like burnt cedar. Helena raised her lantern. "Shall we?" The corridor sloped downward, lined with walls of sandstone. Carvings ran along both sides, a strange fusion of Greek and Egyptian style. One panel showed Alexander crowned by Ammon, the ram-horned god of Shiva. Another depicted him leading armies not just of men, but of figures with wings of fire. "Impossible," Varga whispered, running his fingers over the carving. "This suggests Alexander wasn't just worshipped as a god after death. They believed he commanded divine soldiers." Helena's lantern flickered. For a moment, she thought the figures moved, their fiery wings beating in the darkness. She shook her head. Too much dust. Too little sleep. They reached a massive stone door at the corridor's end. Unlike the rough-hewn walls, this door gleamed faintly, as though polished. Its surface bore a single emblem, a lion's head, mouth open, eyes set with lapis lazuli. Beneath it, Greek words had been carved with almost obsessive precision. "Ho Basileus ou koimatai, the king does not sleep." The lantern light trembled. "Helena," Yusuf's voice was tight. "Maybe we should not go further." But Helena only smiled grimly. "If this is truly what I think it is, we may be standing before one of the greatest discoveries in human history. We didn't come this far to turn back now. It took hours of effort, pulleys, and brute strength to crack the seal. When at last the door swung open, a gust of air rushed out with a sound like a sigh, extinguishing several lanterns. In the sudden gloom, someone swore. Helena relit her lamp. The chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. Pillars carved with scenes of battle and coronation stretched into the dark. At the center stood a sarcophagus of black granite, longer than any they had ever seen, its lid engraved with a wreath of laurel leaves. Gold flakes still clung to the carvings, sparkling in the light. "Alexander," Helena whispered, but before she could step forward, the ground vibrated beneath their feet. A low hum filled the chamber, almost like the distant sound of marching. "Do you hear that?" Yusuf asked, voice shaking. The others nodded, pale. Helena forced herself forward, lantern trembling in her hand. She placed it on the sarcophagus lid and leaned closer. Along the edges of the stone were tiny inscriptions, barely visible. "When the world forgets my name, I shall rise again to claim it." Her throat tightened. She turned to Varga, who stood frozen in terror. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means," he said hoarsely, "this is not a tomb. It's a prison." That night, as the team camped by the excavation pit, no one slept. Strange winds howled across the dunes, carrying with them the faint sound of horns. One of the younger workers swore he saw the silhouette of horsemen against the horizon, though no tracks marked the sand. Helena sat by the fire, staring at the sealed passage they had left behind. Her hands still tingled from touching the sarcophagus. She could not explain why, but in the faint crackle of the flames, she thought she heard a voice, low, commanding, speaking in ancient Greek. "Do not fear, the empire is not yet finished." And then the wind rose, scattering sparks into the star-strewn sky. The awakening. The desert had never been silent, not truly. Even at night there was the whisper of sand shifting, the distant cry of jackals, the rustle of palm leaves. But now, in the aftermath of the discovery, the silence was heavier than stone. It pressed down on the camp, on the lungs of everyone gathered, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Helena Ward lay awake in her tent, her mind replaying the inscription carved into the sarcophagus, "When the world forgets my name, I shall rise again to claim it." She tried to brush it off as the kind of poetic warning tomb builders often used to frighten grave robbers. But a deeper part of her, the instinct honed from years of excavations, whispered that this was different. And then came the dream. She was standing in a vast hall of marble, its columns taller than any she had ever seen. Golden banners draped the walls, embroidered with lions and thunderbolts. At the far end of the hall stood a throne, and upon it sat a figure in armor that gleamed like fire. His eyes, piercing blue, brighter than the desert sky, locked onto hers. "You have opened the door," the man said. His voice rolled like distant thunder. "Now you must walk where I walked." Before Helena could answer, the hall shook. She turned and saw soldiers, thousands of them, marching in perfect formation, their spears raised, their shields flashing. Their boots struck the marble in rhythm, and the sound was like the heartbeat of a god. Then the hall dissolved into sand, and she woke with a cry. Dawn crept over the dunes, staining the sky with pale pink. Helena emerged from her tent to find Yusuf already awake, staring toward the excavation pit. "You dreamed too, didn't you?" he asked quietly. She froze. "What do you mean?" He swallowed. "I saw an army, a king." His shadow stretched across the desert, larger than the mountains. "And I heard him say," his voice faltered. "He said, 'Follow me, and the world is yours.'" Helena's stomach tightened. Different dreams, yet the same man. The same presence. Before she could reply, Professor Vargas stumbled from his tent, pale and sweating. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "We should leave," he rasped. "Seal the chamber. Forget what we saw." "You saw him too," Helena said. Vargas' eyes darted toward her, full of fear. He didn't answer, But the trembling of his lips was answer enough. By mid-morning, the team returned to the chamber. They had left the sarcophagus untouched, fearful of breaking the delicate inscriptions. But as they descended the passage, they noticed something strange. The air was no longer stale. It was fresh, carrying a faint scent of pine, as though a mountain forest lay just beyond the walls. And the murals, they had changed. The scenes that had once been static carvings now seemed alive with color. Helena raised her lantern, and her breath caught. The figures of Alexander's soldiers, once faded outlines, now gleamed in rich pigments. Reds, blues, golds, as if the paint had been applied only yesterday. One soldier even seemed to turn his head, his eyes glinting in the light. "This is impossible," Yusuf whispered. "We saw these walls. They were dead stone." "Maybe the light," Helena began, but even she couldn't finish the lie. She knew something in this place was stirring. They reached the sarcophagus. The granite still glistened with that faint, unnatural sheen. But the lid, Helena blinked. Had it shifted? Only slightly, but enough to notice. "Someone's been here," Varga muttered. "No," Helena said firmly. "No one has touched it since last night." She traced the seam with her fingers. It was warm again, warmer than before. And then it happened. The chamber trembled, dust raining from the ceiling. A deep horn blast shook the air, reverberating through their bones. The sound did not come from outside. It came from within the sarcophagus. The workers panicked, scrambling toward the exit, shouting in Arabic. Yusuf grabbed Helena's arm, pulling her back. The horn sounded again, and with it came light, thin cracks of golden radiance seeping from the sarcophagus lid. The inscriptions glowed like molten metal. Helena's heart pounded. Part of her screamed to run, but another part, stronger, fiercer, was entranced. This was history awakening before her eyes. And then she heard the voice. "The world is fractured. My empire sleeps. Awaken me, and I shall make it whole." It was not sound. It was thought, pressed into her mind like a brand. She gasped and staggered back. Varga clutched his head, screaming in Hungarian. Yusuf fell to his knees, weeping. Every person in that chamber heard the same words, though none spoke them aloud. The light flared brighter, and then, just as suddenly, vanished. The horn fell silent. The sarcophagus returned to stillness. But the damage was done. That evening, Helena tried to document everything. She sat at her desk beneath a flickering lamp, scribbling in her journal. The sarcophagus responded to our presence. The murals have come alive. All members of the team reported auditory or visual hallucinations. Possible mass hysteria. Her pen hovered. No, this was more than hysteria. The voice had been real. Outside, the desert was restless. Winds whipped the tents, and in the distance came a sound like boots striking the earth in unison. The workers refused to stay. By nightfall, half of them had packed the things and fled back toward Shiva. Helena remained. She couldn't leave, not now. This was the discovery of her life, of 1,000 lives, and yet she couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her chest. If this was truly Alexander's tomb, why had history hidden it so thoroughly? Why the warnings? Her thoughts were broken by Yusuf bursting into her tent, his face pale. "You must come, now." He dragged her outside. At the edge of the camp, 3 figures stood against the horizon, where the dunes met the starry sky. Helena's breath caught. They were soldiers, not men in modern garb, soldiers in bronze armor, helmets crested with horsehair, spears gleaming in the starlight. Their forms shimmered, half solid, like mirages. Yet the sand shifted beneath their feet as they marched closer. Varga collapsed to his knees, muttering prayers. Yusuf gripped Helena's arm in terror. The soldiers stopped just beyond the campfire's glow. One raised his spear in salute. And then, in perfect unison, they spoke. "The king has awoken. The curse." The soldiers vanished with the first gust of wind. One moment they stood at the edge of the camp, bronze gleaming under starlight, and the next, nothing but the shifting dunes. Yet the sand where they had stood bore footprints, deep and unmistakable. Helena stared at the impressions, her throat dry. Yusuf bent low, touching the sand with trembling fingers. They were real, he whispered. Not visions. Real. Professor Varga shook his head violently. No, illusions. The desert does this. It plays tricks, it makes mirages. But his eyes, wide and bloodshot, betrayed the truth. He didn't believe his own words. Helena forced herself to speak. We need to record everything. Every sign, every symbol. If this truly is Alexander's tomb, then history must know. History. Varga snapped, his voice trembling with anger and fear. This is no tomb. This is a prison. Fire. Strange phenomena. The following days spiraled into chaos. The camp grew smaller as more workers abandoned the site, muttering of jinn and curses. The few who stayed were loyal only to Helena, though even they cast uneasy glances at the dunes when the sun dipped. And then the phenomena began. The first was sound. At night, faint chanting drifted across the desert, a chorus in Greek, low and rhythmic. No matter where they searched, they could not trace its source. The second was sight. Helena awoke one dawn to find Yusuf staring toward the horizon. There, shimmering like heat mirage, was a city. Towering walls, shining temples, streets alive with color. She rubbed her eyes, but it remained for a full minute before fading like smoke. Babylon, Yusuf whispered. I know it. I've seen its paintings. That was Babylon. The third was blood. A worker named Karim entered the chamber one morning, eager to sketch the murals. Hours later he stumbled out, clutching his arm. Helena gasped when she saw his palm. It dripped red, the skin cut open in the shape of a lion's head. I didn't touch anything, Karim cried. The wall cut me. Helena rushed into the chamber. The murals had shifted again. Where once soldiers marched, now lions roared, painted in crimson that gleamed wetly. She touched the wall. The paint was fresh. That night Karim fled, leaving his wages behind. Crossed swords the rival treasure hunters. As if the curse itself weren't enough, word of the discovery had spread. By the fifth day, a caravan appeared, armed men with rifles, led by a man Helena recognized at once, Marcus Leclerc, a rival archaeologist and looter infamous for selling relics on the black market. Well, he said with a smile too sharp to be friendly. Dr. Ward, imagine my luck, stumbling upon your little dig. You shouldn't be here, Helena said coldly. This site is protected. Leclerc laughed. Protected? Out here, nothing is protected. Not from me. His men spread out, their eyes gleaming at the camp supplies, the excavation pit. Varga hissed under his breath. We must leave. If the tomb doesn't kill us, Leclerc will. But Helena stood her ground. She couldn't abandon the tomb. Not when it was on the edge of revealing its truth. Leclerc strutted toward the pit, his boots crunching the sand. So, they say you've found the Conqueror himself. Alexander, eh? Imagine what the world would pay for his remains. Imagine what I will pay myself. Helena's chest tightened. She knew what would happen if he tried to open the sarcophagus. She had seen enough to understand, this was no treasure to be taken. It was a force bound by warnings, by seals not meant to break. Don't touch it, she said sharply. Leclerc smirked. Or what? You'll curse me. But before she could answer, the ground beneath them shuddered. Tornado. The tomb reacts. Sand poured from the dunes, cascading into the pit. The air grew thick, buzzing with a low hum. The murals on the chamber walls flared with golden light, so bright that even the intruders staggered back. From the shadows of the chamber, shapes began to emerge. At first Helena thought they were statues, stone men stepping down from the walls. But as they moved, their armor glinted, their eyes burning with fire. Warriors of marble and bronze, their faces carved yet alive. The mercenaries screamed. One fired his rifle, the shot echoing in the chamber. The bullet struck a soldier's chest, sparks flew, but the warrior kept walking, spear raised. Leclerc's bravado shattered. What are they? Helena's voice trembled. Guardians. The Guardians. The warriors advanced, their footsteps shaking the ground. Panic erupted. Men fled in all directions, some cut down by spectral spears that left no wounds but drained the life from their bodies. Helena grabbed Yusuf's arm. "We have to seal it. The entrance, collapse it." But Yusuf was frozen, his eyes wide, fixed on the sarcophagus. The lid was shifting again. Slowly, grinding stone against stone, it moved aside. Light spilled forth, golden, blinding, alive. And with it, a voice that thundered inside every skull. "I am not done." Milky Way visions of empire. The light engulfed them, pulling Helena into a vision so vivid she forgot to breathe. She stood atop a hill, the world stretching before her in fire and glory. Armies clashed in endless waves, spears and cavalry, banners of Macedon whipping in the wind. Cities burned, temples fell, and at the center of it all rode a man in shining armor, his eyes blazing with conquest. Alexander. He turned, his gaze falling on her. His voice shook the earth. "You found me. You opened the way. Now the world shall remember me." Helena shook her head. "The world already remembers. You a legend. You a history. History fades," he growled. "Empires crumble, but I remain, and I will rise again." He raised his sword, and the armies roared. Helena stumbled back into reality, gasping. The chamber was chaos, mercenaries fleeing, workers screaming, Yusuf dragging her toward the exit. The warriors of stone pressed closer, driving intruders into the sands. Varga clutched his chest, collapsing against the wall, his lips whispering, "We've doomed ourselves." And through it all, the sarcophagus glowed brighter. The shape within was no corpse. It was a figure upright, golden armor clinging to his form, his hands resting on a sword. His eyes, shut now, flickered beneath the lids, as though dreaming. Helena felt the weight of destiny pressing on her shoulders. She realized with sick certainty, the curse was not to guard Alexander's tomb. The curse was to guard the world from Alexander himself. And now, they had cracked the seal. The return of the king. The golden light pulsed like a heartbeat. The sarcophagus lid slid further aside, the grinding echo filling the tomb. The figure within stirred, armored hands shifting as if waking from a long dream. Helena clutched Yusuf's arm. "Don't look," she whispered, though her own eyes were fixed on the impossible sight. The warriors of stone had formed a ring around the chamber, their spears pointed inward. The mercenaries who had not fled cowered on their knees, some weeping, others frozen with terror. Even Leclerc's arrogance had vanished. His face was pale, slick with sweat. Then the voice spoke again, this time not inside their heads, but aloud, filling the air with thunder. "I am Alexander. I am the Conqueror. I am not finished. Crown the awakening." The figure rose from the sarcophagus. His golden armor gleamed, flawless despite the centuries. His cloak, deep crimson, flowed as though caught in a breeze none of them felt. His face was youthful, perfect, untouched by time, yet his eyes glowed with an unnatural fire, blue and unyielding. He stepped forward, and the warriors of stone knelt instantly, lowering their spears in reverence. The murals on the walls wreathed and shifted, no longer scenes of conquest but a living map, the ancient world bending beneath his feet. Alexander raised his sword, its blade radiant with golden flame. The entire chamber shook. Helena's breath caught. This was no ghost. This was no memory. This was Alexander returned, reborn in a body preserved by power beyond mortal understanding. "Your world lies in ruin," Alexander declared, his voice like rolling thunder. "Kingdoms broken, nations divided, rulers weak. My empire shall rise again." The mercenaries, desperate, began to shout. One man raised his rifle, firing a shot that rang through the chamber. The bullet struck Alexander's chest, and dissolved in sparks. Alexander turned slowly toward the man. His eyes burned brighter. "Kneel!" The mercenary screamed as his body twisted unnaturally. His spine bent, his legs forced downward until he collapsed on his knees, trembling uncontrollably. The others dropped in terror, bowing before the resurrected king. Helena's heart pounded. If Alexander's will could bend men so easily, what would happen if he reached Cairo? Or the world beyond? She stepped forward despite the fear, raising her voice. You cannot return. The world has changed. Your empire is gone. You cannot rule the living. Alexander's gaze fell upon her. For a heartbeat, silence. Then he smiled. You freed me. You shall be my herald. The world will know my name through your tongue. Tornado. The army rises. The ground above trembled. Outside, the dunes split open as spectral soldiers marched forth, their armor gleaming faintly under moonlight. Thousands of them, row upon row, spears held high, shields clashing in rhythm. The sound echoed like distant thunder across the desert. Villagers in the oasis screamed as ghostly riders charged through the streets, their hooves leaving no mark yet shaking the earth. Fires erupted without flame, buildings crumbling as though struck by unseen siege engines. The army of Alexander was returning. Helena stood frozen at the edge of the chamber, watching the impossible. History itself was bleeding into reality. She remembered the inscription carved above the entrance, "The Conqueror shall rise again when the world forgets his name." And she understood the curse. The tomb had not been built to honor Alexander. It had been built to contain him. If he escaped, the world would drown in conquest once more. Crossed swords clash in the chamber. Leclerc, desperate for survival, crawled toward Alexander. "Great king," he gasped, "take me with you. Let me serve you. I will be your general." Alexander regarded him coolly. A general. His lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "Prove your strength." Leclerc looked around wildly. His eyes fell on Yusuf. With a snarl of desperation, he lunged, drawing a dagger from his belt. "Helena!" Yusuf cried, struggling as Leclerc forced him to the ground. Helena rushed forward, but Alexander raised his hand. The warriors of stone blocked her path with crossed spears. Leclerc pressed the blade to Yusuf's throat. "If you want loyalty, my king, then see how I offer sacrifice." But before the blade could fall, Alexander spoke a single word. "Unworthy." Leclerc screamed as his body turned rigid. His skin hardened, his flesh cracking, until in moments he was nothing but another statue, forever frozen in terror, his dagger inches from Yusuf's neck. The Conqueror's army had gained a new guardian. Milky Way. Helena's choice. Helena's mind raced. There had to be a way to stop him. She remembered the old scrolls, the warnings carved into the stone. The tomb's guardians were not meant to protect Alexander, they were meant to protect the world from him. She turned to Yusuf. "The seal. There has to be a way to close it again." Yusuf's face was pale, but his eyes burned with resolve. "But it will need a sacrifice. Someone to bind it." Her heart clenched. She knew. Deep down, she had known from the moment they opened the chamber. Alexander strode toward the exit, his army waiting above. His voice rolled like thunder. "The world shall march under my banner once more. Those who resist will be forgotten." Helena stepped forward, blocking his path. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "You will not leave this place." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "You would defy me. I would end you." She turned to Yusuf, whispering urgently, "Seal the tomb, now." Yusuf's face twisted with horror. "Helena, no. Do it. Fire the final battle." Alexander raised his sword. "Then you shall fall first." The blade descended, but Helena caught it. Her hands burned, flesh searing as golden fire coursed through her veins. Pain ripped through her, but she held firm. Around them, the chamber shook violently. The murals flared with blinding light. The warriors of stone howled, collapsing into dust as the curse reawakened. Helena screamed, forcing the blade downward, not away from her, but into her chest. The weapon pierced her heart, golden fire erupting outward. Alexander staggered, his eyes wide with shock as the flames spread from her body into his, consuming him. His roar of fury shook the earth. "No, I am eternal. I am." The words cut off in a blinding explosion of light. Crescent moon. The tomb sealed. When the dust cleared, the chamber was silent. The sarcophagus stood whole once more, its lid sealed tight, golden runes glowing faintly across its surface. Helena was gone. Yusuf collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Varga, trembling, whispered, "She bound herself, she sealed him again." Above, the spectral army dissolved into mist. The dunes settled, the oasis quieted, the fires gone as if they had never been. The desert returned to stillness. Only the whispers of the wind remained, carrying faint echoes of marching feet. Candle Epilogue. Weeks later, Yusuf returned to Cairo alone. He gave no interviews, showed no evidence, offered no proof. When asked about Helena, he only said, "She gave everything to protect us." The location of the tomb vanished with the shifting sands. Maps were lost, the desert swallowed every trace. But those who travel near Shiva Oasis still whisper. On moonless nights, they hear the sound of drums, the clash of shields, and the faint voice of a woman crying out against the storm. And some say, when the wind is right, you can hear Alexander's roar still, buried beneath the earth, waiting.